Hello, everybody. How's it going? We're going to switch gears now. You know, what the studio folks don't tell you about the movies is they tend to be a turbulent business. Even the best laid plans can go awry fairly quickly. And by the way, even sometimes the best laid plans can create great movies. That doesn't necessarily mean that the audience is going to embrace those movies. So I'm not about to offer a rebuttal to the previous segment, but the point I want to make is entertainment is a volatile business. Movies work, they don't work, it goes up and down, lots of headlines and turbulence, and we're seeing that play out in a big way right now in the business. Warner Brothers Discovery, I think, could speak to that quite a bit. Why do I bring this up is because I think what I'm about to talk about now in sports rights represents really the diametric opposite of that instability. The whole beauty of the sports business is that it is a reliable, consistent performer in terms of, and I'm going to maybe go back to my slide here. It's just a reliable performer compared to entertainment, which is more volatile, which really makes it probably the most valuable asset in all of the media business. And so I'm going to talk about that today. Before I even dive in further, just to explain where I'm coming from and who I am, my name is Andrew Wallenstein. I think you already heard that. If you haven't heard of Variety Intelligence Platform, it's a division that I launched this week, 5 years ago, which feels like why not clap? Thank you very much. You know what, I'm gonna just take outrageous bows. No, it's been a real labor of love that I started over at Variety, where I used to be the co-editor-in-chief, but then transitioned to launch this market research business 5 years ago. Sports, by the way, was one of the very first things we focused on 5 years ago. And now here we are this week putting out this brand new report once again on the state of sports rights. And if you're interested in this kind of research, I recommend you go to variety.com/VIP. That's short for Variety Intelligence Platform, where you could learn a lot about not just the research that we're doing with sports data, but really a very broad variety of content sectors within media and technology, even film, and there's a lot there. I will also note that Variety Intelligence Platform is no longer a part of Variety, even though it's available on Variety. We have now since moved over to a business called Luminate, which is the premier entertainment data and insights provider, and we're finding ourselves on a whole new direction in their oversight, and you'll see lots more on that to come. Enough of the plug. Let's go back to the data. Sports, as you can see here, I want you to focus first on the chart on the right. I guess I could look at here. And it's pretty remarkable when you look at that top 100 primetime telecasts. That tells you a lot right there. When you look at the growth, that, in case you haven't done the math yet, is a doubling from 2019 to 2024 of the number of sports programs that rank among the highest rated programs in a given year. That growth really tells you everything that you're going to need to know in terms of the value of sports. It's tremendous and bigger than ever. And in contrast to what I was talking about earlier, it is starting to crowd out the entertainment part of media. And you get somewhat of a reflection of that on the left side, where we have spending data on sports content versus non-sports content at the major media companies. And clearly the entertainment spend, non-sports spend, is far greater, but I want you to drill a little deeper into the numbers there and look at the growth rates, where, first of all, what's interesting is if you look on the left side at 2024 going to 2025, while clearly sports is growing at a much more aggressive spending growth curve than entertainment, it's actually going to be taking a bit of a step back this year. And I think that's representing a sort of a recalibration moment as various rights deals that we'll talk about in greater detail change hands. Were obviously a major theme that emerged in our research in this report is, if you were to really boil down to the state of streaming these days, sports has become such a huge momentum area, and you better believe it's a bit of a zero-sum game with the rest of the entertainment space. And what I mean by that is, when you look back on the chart on the right and those traditional telecasts, more and more of those games that were on traditional broadcasters, be it CBS, NBC, and Fox, we're starting to see the tech companies slowly but surely pull away major rights deals. Sometimes not entirely. We're seeing much more in terms of split differences, and we'll talk about individual deals there. But Amazon, Apple, even Netflix now is starting to invest more and more for the same reason that the data on the right indicates. When you want to command the biggest and best content on television and do so in a reliable fashion, because sports does not tend to underperform, although there are weak spots, and we can get into that as well. And by the way, I would like to leave some time at the end for questions. If you do at the end, I'll just say, let's save it for then, and we could talk a bit more about that. May not have every answer you're looking for, but I'll do my best. Let's move on to the next slide. This, first of all, I want to say, this is a real homecoming for me here today, because the data you're looking at here was compiled with my friend Jay Tucker from the Anderson School and his marvelous student fellows. Maybe some are in the audience today, and I'd be happy to cede the microphone right now if you want to just step up and take it from here. They're the ones who worked on compiling this incredible data, which is not just a list of all the major deals in terms of sports rights, who is at what streamer or at what network, but it also shows you the dollar value. I apologize, this doesn't necessarily translate that well to the big screen, but I'll do my best to pinpoint some interesting things for you. And to me, what's most interesting is on the right side columns, those two columns that give you a sense of the percentage increase per deal cycle, which to us is where the focus has to be in terms of trying to assess, okay, clearly I've blown enough smoke to point out here that sports is the most valuable property when compared to entertainment as an asset in media content, but how valuable is it? And with each deal, which typically is going to get an increase year over year, at least at a small percentage number, but we're also starting to see far higher increases, and we don't think that's necessarily going to consist across the board for all sports, major or minor. We do think there's a tiering. I would say that the NFL, for instance, really stands alone in its value, and come, I think, 2029, 2030, according to this, you'll see a renegotiation on those rights. You'll probably see the streamers start to grab more share of that. I would put behind that the Olympics, which is actually not on this because we wanted to focus really more on sort of the day-to-day leagues, not this occasional thing, but the Olympics is obviously a massive property. And then really I'd put everything else, which I think is on a lower tier, probably starting with the NBA. The NBA, you might recall, re-signed a new deal last year that was represented roughly a tripling of the rights deal, to which some of you might be confused because you might be aware of lots of data points lately coming out of the NBA about how certain ratings are not as strong as they used to be. But you have to keep in mind as well that even when ratings go down, if everything else in entertainment is going down, you still hold up your value even though you're not increasing. So it's a bit counterintuitive. Nevertheless, the NBA showed that even in a small decline, it's become much more valuable. And I think that also sets to some degree a benchmark for weighing all the next big deals that are to come, which are our way of really taking the temperature of sports rights. So obviously there's a whole phone book of deals here. I do want to point out the deals that I think are the ones you need to be watching in 2025 because they're probably the biggest and most important to pay attention to. And I think they're pretty much all connected to Disney, which for those of you who know, Disney owns ESPN. They're clearly the 800-pound gorilla, but they've got plenty of stiff competition as well in the sports rights space. But a few things you should be pointing out. If you look at in the middle where it says combat, in the middle of the list, the UFC right now is the deal the industry is waiting on. It's currently at ESPN. Now, ESPN should be very incentivized to make a good deal to retain at least some of the UFC. Why? Because really, perhaps the biggest development this year in 2025 in the sports rights space is ESPN is, cutting the cord, as they say. They're going to have what I believe is at least tentatively known as their ESPN flagship product that will be going out to direct to consumers. They want to obviously have the best arsenal of content they possibly have, and so they're kind of reevaluating what they've got. And the UFC is going to be commanding a pretty penny. I don't know that we'll necessarily see a tripling the way the NBA did. The NBA is at I would say, a whole other level compared to the UFC, which I'd put more in the middle of the pack in terms of the value of sports rights. But I would not be surprised if you're going to pin me to a prediction that you will see Disney pay through the nose to retain at least some of UFC, but I would not be surprised at all if a streaming service comes in as well as a secondary rights holder. It might make a lot of sense for that to be Netflix because Netflix already just recently took in the WWE from Fox, and UFC and WWE are both owned by TKO, a company that here in Hollywood we know very well. That's Ari Emanuel's company. So that's what I think is going to happen there. Another rights decision that I would probably put in a close second to UFC in interest, but is a much lower value, but I think much higher upside, is F1 racing, which has been something that's actually probably gotten more attention in the US, less from a game perspective and more from sports shoulder content, documentary content perspective. Netflix has done, as you've seen, I'm sure plenty of subscribers in the room have noticed, the tons of sports documentary content that has been on Netflix and other streaming services in recent years. And I think the success they've had there poises the F1 league for tremendous growth that translates back to those rights value. And I also wouldn't be surprised to see Netflix aggressively bidding there because it makes sense. They've already got an audience in place on F1. And maybe the last thing I would note here, again, Disney related, you may have seen that Major League Baseball is something that ESPN seems to have cooled their jets on and are basically opting out of the current deal. So we've got to see how that one plays out. But it's very interesting watching Disney sort of assess what is valuable to them. And I've just mentioned 3 different properties. I could make a speech on each and every one thing here, but maybe we'll revisit that a little later. Another data point I wanted to share from the slide, we talk about lots of different kinds of factors that either weigh or boost the value of sports rights. And consolidation is one factor that we wanted to take a look at. And consolidation in the industry, which we believe could actually be somewhat of a suppressant on the rights of on the value of these games rights. What do I mean by that? Put it this way. I think everyone has been looking at the entertainment space now for years and expecting these companies to come together. There was a lot of expectation, certainly when the Trump administration began, a misconception perhaps, that Trump would signal sort of a time of increased M&A, not just in the sports space, but really for any industry. Not quite playing out like that. Remains to be seen what the field is going to be like for more of this M&A, but that doesn't change the fact that there's still great expectation that consolidation is where this is going to go, with companies coming together. And the reason we believe that becomes a suppressant on rights fees is because the more leverage the bigger rights acquirer has, the more they have the ability to push back at the negotiation table against leagues that have some pretty huge power in their own right. But it really depends on how consolidation plays out. There's scenarios like you're seeing in terms of Paramount and Skydance, not the best example. Skydance doesn't come in with any sports rights. But if we saw, say, Paramount combined with Comcast, which would be a tremendous conglomeration of important deals, well, then, presuming Comcast is the acquirer, I don't think it would be Paramount, certainly Comcast then, in its negotiations across so many different leagues, will become more powerful. And so as we looked at lots of different factors in this report about what could weigh on sports fees, what could increase fees, and you see some sentiment here that we took. Altman Solon is a research service that did a recent survey talking with sports executives about how they felt the prospect of consolidation could weigh on this. And obviously there's a great deal of uncertainty, but also a great deal of 37% saying the value of sports rights will gradually decrease. If you look at the chart on the right, it's more of a breakdown on what that impact could mean on a sport-by-sport basis, not just in the US, but abroad. I will note that our sports rights report really only focuses on the US side of the equation. But again, it is a factor here. Other factors I could talk about as well, but I also will say at this point, if you guys have questions, I'm happy to start taking them. So keep that in mind. We can get a mic over to you. There's lots of other factors that are going to play a part here. One factor that I think is pretty interesting to note, for instance, is the rise of social media, particularly among younger viewers, and how that becomes more and more of a place for consumers to be consuming sports content, perhaps not in a full-length game scenario. You could argue that a younger generation brought up on TikTok and the like may not necessarily care that much about a game 37 on the NBA regular season schedule or game 109 on the Major League Baseball regular season schedule. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't value on these social platforms to be gleaned from highlights and just all sorts of kind of fan engagement. Nevertheless, you have to wonder, in the longer term, do the rights to the full game experience start to come down as this younger generation that may not necessarily have the patience to take in anything but perhaps, playoff or championship games, which obviously are able to hold on to their audience at a much greater scale than the regular season games are. So it's just another example of another factor that we're watching. Now, I've got light in my eyes, so I thought I saw a hand or so, but I don't know that I have. Or maybe I'm just hallucinating. Or was that in the middle there? Yeah, come on up. I'm going to send you out if you end up repeating something.
But I was curious, if you talk about the consumption of younger people in sports media and kind of only the interest in playoffs and the big games, have you seen a decrease in regular season viewership? Is it just super fans, or do you see the casual sports fans still, when available or applicable, watching regular season?
Thanks. The first thing I'm going to do is caution myself not to generalize, because different sports see different things. And to your question, if you look at the NFL ratings, Again, there was a reason I said at the beginning, the NFL is on a tier on its own and nothing else is close. And what you see from the NFL, not just coming off, I think, the most watched Super Bowl ever, but the regular season ratings show almost no decline. And forgive me, it may even be a more market increase. I just don't have the numbers handy. But what I could say with authority, not looking at the numbers, is there's the NFL and the health of regular season content there. And then there's everyone else, where I think there is a much clearer problem that regular season content, and again, I'm probably, there's probably too broad a brush here. There might be, I don't even want to get into local teams and the whole regional sports network business, which is a whole other thing. We're just going to keep this to a national level. But there could be RSNs that are seeing great audience for very competitive, big market teams that don't give you a sense of what is overall a declining health of regular season content across most sports.
So my question is in that same vein. You saw this year, for the first time in a while, the NFL compete against the NBA for a Christmas Day game.
Yeah.
And it turns out that they did very, very well. And it looks like they're going to offer 3 or 4 NFL games next Christmas. So now they're in direct competition with the biggest game day of the season outside of the playoffs for the NBA.
Yeah.
How do you think that will impact broadcasting deals for the NBA going forward? Like you said, NFL is king. So if they are going to take one of their highest viewed days, how will that affect the deals going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would have loved to have been a fly in NBA Commissioner Adam Silver's office when he found out what Netflix was going to be doing on Christmas, which, to your point, was never a big day for the NFL or any day for the NFL at all, but it was a huge day for the NBA. I will defend the NBA by saying, if you look at the numbers this year, NBA did not do as badly as I think some feared and held up nicely, but make no mistake, as long as the NFL continues, as I expect they will, to not even just do Christmas Day, but I think they'll probably eventually get their hands on other things, that is a major competitive disadvantage for the NBA. And I would argue the NBA also it's almost like, watching a piece of meat with a vulture swooping over it in terms of what's going on with the All-Star game, which the NBA continues to screw up year after year. And the rating, Adam Silver were here, he'd admit it too. He did actually a few weeks ago say, hey, we tried an experiment and it didn't work and we got to figure something else out. They better figure out something else fast or competition is going to come there too, because it's sort of like the flabby midsection of the NBA schedule. Thought the NBA did a really good job in recent years. I forgot the name of the league, the sort of in-league, the cup. Right. No, I'm not talking about the play-in tournament, although that's great too. I'm talking about a month ago, the NBA, right, thank you, right term, in-season tournament, I think it was a step in the right direction. And I look for that to grow continuously, and I think they need to show some of the creativity they showed there and with the play-in game on the All-Star break. Oh, sorry, I can't see anything.
Hi. So I was wondering how much these leagues are considering international markets in their deals, because streaming is obviously like worldwide compared to networks. And you have Messi in MLS now, you have the Dodgers exploding in Asia. F1 is obviously more popular in Europe than the US. So how much are these leagues considering international audiences compared to the domestic audiences? Okay.
And I think this will be the last question, but a good one. And there's a number of levels to this. I'm going to go back to the NBA, where if you were to talk to Adam Silver today and probably say, what is your biggest priority? It is the international market, but maybe not in the way that you're thinking about it, which is taking the broadcasts of the current NBA product and broadcasting them internationally. That's a nice business, and I think that's a nice business for all leagues, but what the NBA is focused on is creating additional international leagues with the NBA branding, kind of like the WNBA, which by the way, forgiveness that I went this far into the presentation without saluting the incredible growth of women's leagues. You're seeing that. I don't play, I just comment. But certainly that is the beginning of a trend that is going to stick, and I hope to see in other sports as well. Getting back on point, though, I think you're going to see the NBA focused on getting like a European league together. I believe they already have an African league together. The rights to those things are to taking the NBA US product or MLB product depends on the leagues. Different leagues have different levels of exposure internationally. NBA and MLB are actually exactly different. NBA is a very global friendly sport. Major League Baseball is in one territory in Asia, which is fantastic, and maybe there's room for growth there, but Major League Baseball is very much a regional sport, very team-centric, pockets of growth depending on what team is where. One last point I want to make when you mentioned Messi and the Apple deal that they have for Major League Soccer, it's been interesting to note what you would ordinarily salute as a big coup. Hey, Apple got soccer exclusively and they got Messi, and that's great to a point, because there has actually been a growing criticism that by putting soccer, a growing US sport, on a relatively, for all of Apple's success across many other fields, Apple TV Plus is not the biggest success. And so there's been a lot of criticism that this is actually going to end up limiting the growth of soccer when it should be more advantaged by a broadcast deal, a more traditional deal that would make it more open. That's all the time I have. Appreciate your time. Check out VIP.